Hi everyone and welcome to this lecture of the PhenoLab. Today it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you Dr. Fortunata Romeo. Fortunata Romeo is a physiotherapist, but moreover she is also a PhD student in a theoretical and experimental linguistics at EUCC Pavia with a scholarship on language and rehabilitation co-funded by Villa Miari Institution in Sant'Orso. Physiotherapist since 1984, she has worked mainly in the national Italian health system in the field of rehabilitation of neurological pathologies. She received a master's degree in 2002 in modern literature at the University of Genoa with a thesis on cognitive psychology on the role of the ventral and dorsal pathways in the organization of action and perception. She taught from 2003 to 2023 neurological rehabilitation as adjunct lectures in the Bachelor of Science in Physiotherapy and Master of Science in Neuroscience at the University of Genoa. She's a teacher in neurocognitive rehabilitation, and in particular, she has been interested in the role of patient's language as a datum for interpreting the pathology and the therapist's language as a guide to the activation of cognitive processes for motor recovery. Dr. Romeo co-authored two books. The first one is Being True for a neurocognitive recovery of bimanual acting in 2020 and La teoria neurocognitiva secondo il CTA riabilitazione neurocognitiva, published in 2021, and unfortunately is available only the Spanish translation of this book. Fortunata, it's a great pleasure to host you here, especially because I know your important work in the field of rehabilitation, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, and I thank Professor Brenton for the invitation, which I am honored to receive. The title of my talk is Phenomenology and Neurocognitive Rehabilitation, the work in the lived body. In this picture, you can see the Center of Neurocognitive Studies that is located in Sant'Orso, near Venice. Neurocognitive rehabilitation is a rehabilitation approach designed by Professor Perfetti's group and which now has its main research center in Italy, at the center that you can see in the map, near Venice, 1 hour near Venice. In scientific literature, our approach goes under different names. CMR, Cognitive Multisensory Rehabilitation, ETC, Cognitive Therapeutic Exercises, Cognitive Exercise Therapy, CSMT, Cognitive Sensory Motor Training, Perfetti Method, Cognitive Approach. And this is the link to the website. To introduce today's topic, namely the connection between phenomenology and neurocognitive rehabilitation and the work in the lived body that is inherent to our particular rehabilitation approach, I will begin by outlining a brief history of physiotherapy to make sure you understand how our approach differs from the most common view in the physiotherapeutic field. Physiotherapy is a young discipline whose origins, however, go back to ancient, fundamentally manual practices. Its birth in modern times can be traced back to the Frenchman Tissot and the Sweden Ling, who understood the importance of gymnastics in treating diseases. So basically, at the origin, physiotherapy consisted of mobilizations and physical exercise addressed to muscles and joints, and still now this is the dominant model. What point of view on the body and on movement underlies this type of intervention that is still dominant, which theory, even if implicit, guides the physiotherapist's choices. A theory of movement is a structured set of knowledge concerning how movement is generated and its meaning for human being. Movement theories have an history, and each theory determines a certain way of observing the patient and a certain rehabilitation approach. From the theory comes a certain way of observing the patient and interpreting their pathology, and precise tools to be used in exercise. So exercise is only a step in the rehabilitative reasoning. I will try to show the main steps in the history of the movement and body theories. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the human body and muscle were studies on cadavers. The study of muscle and its property carried on until the use of electric current to highlight the functions of individual muscles with the work of Duchenne de Boulogne in 1800. Boulogne identifies muscles and related movement, interpreting as a voluntary movement what is a simple contraction induced by an electric current. We are dealing with a body understood as a machine that works with electrical impulses. This approach, which emphasizes the most observable aspect of movement, namely muscular contraction, is still widespread today, and it is the basis of a rehabilitation vision that considers movement as muscular strength and proposes muscular strengthening or stretching through the use of a variety of mechanical techniques and tools, as you can see in this photo. The neurologist Sherrington in 1906 had a great influence on the study of movement. According to Sherrington, motor behavior is determined by reflex activity in response to stimuli. His findings were greatly influenced by the fact he studied on the cerebrate animals in a situation where the brain was put out of action under conditions very different from those of real action. The influence of Sherrington's work has been and still is relevant in the rehabilitation field, shaping many methods based on the elicitation of movement through esteroceptive and proprioceptive stimuli proposed by the therapist. Such methods seek to evoke complex behaviors through external stimuli. They favor reactive response rather than internal motivation, prediction, and action planning. Here you see that the therapist performs gestures on the patient's body to elicit balance reactions through thrusts and positioning, thus relying on a theory of movement as a reflex. The approach considered so far, which originated from studies of cadaver and of the cerebrate animal, are based on a linear model of action in which there is an incoming stimulus and an outgoing output. The central nervous system passively receives the stimuli. There is unidirectionality between therapist and patient. There is no purpose preceding action, and there is no need to talk with the patient. Everything happens in the here and now without memory or prediction. These methods are called synchronic for this reason. These methods achieved some results, especially in some functions such as walking, but the recovered movement is a low quality movement, poorly adaptive and variable, and with strongly pathological features. Furthermore, the hand recovery is completely neglected. In 17th, in Pisa, Italy, a group of therapists and physicians, led by Professor Perfetti, a neuropsychiatrist, strongly dissatisfied with the then common rehabilitation approach, tried to give new answers to the problem they encountered in their clinical practice, building a new theoretical paradigm. We think that it has been a revolution in rehabilitative approach. The problem from which they start is precisely the recovery of the hemiplegic hand. Why doesn't the hand recover? Why doesn't the hand recover its movement? You can see here, hand closed. It is very hard to recover the movement of the hand. So from that problem, all this approach began in the 60s. Studying the hand and its meaning for human being and the exercise proposed until then, Professor Perfetti noticed that the hand had been considered as a mechanical tool and that no importance was given to the sense of touch and to the cognitive function of this part of the body. Following the vein of the Soviet School of Neuropsychology and referring to scientists as Luria, Anokin, and Vygotsky, Professor Perfetti and his colleague hypothesized that cognitive processes such as attention, perception, memory, and language might play a role in recovery. So the research group assumed that the hand should be considered in its perceptual aspects as an organ of touch, as a sensory organ which allows some kind of knowledge of the world. How did this paradigm shift apply to therapeutical proposal? Instead of passively stretching patient hands, instead of opening them mechanically, or by reflex, we began to propose exercise in which we guided people to tactile knowledge experiences. We invented tools to simplify reality, isolating some features without losing the meaning of the cognitive and interactive relationship between the hand and the world. So we started to guide the patient to touch fabrics and shapes, asking them to solve discrimination problems. For example, in this exercise, the focus is on tactile information and on the role of fingertips and their reciprocal relationships. The therapist asks the patient, is the surface you are touching with your thumb the same as the surface you are touching with your other fingers? As you can see, even in apparently simple exercise, the involvement of the subject is global. Processes such as attention, memory, language, prediction are involved. Problem solving is proposed and the mind-body environment relationship is present. We moved from the study of a movement as the sum of muscle contractions to intentional movement aimed at a purpose, and therefore from a passive patient who undergoes the therapist's manipulations to a cognitive subject who cooperates in recovery by implementing his own subjective experience. This is the first definition of the cognitive theory. The quality of both spontaneous and guided recovery depends on the cognitive processes activated and the mode of their activation. Here we finally find in the field of neurological rehabilitation the assumption of mind-body context unity. We have introduced the mind in motor rehabilitation, and we use an expression and mind-body homologous to embodied to highlight that for physiotherapy, the path began with a mechanical body conquesting gradually a relationship with the mind, and therefore a recovery of the integrity of the subject acting in the world. So far, we have seen the transition from the simpler reductionist visions in which the subject responds to stimuli and the external point of view prevails to more complex systemic vision in which the subject learns in an unpredictable way. In physiotherapy nowadays, the biopsychosocial approach is proposed and widely shared to overcome reductionism. However, we believe that this approach, which adds two dimensions to the physical and biological one, namely the psychological and social dimensions, is not enough to overcome the separation between body, mind, and environment, considering that therapists continue to propose physical exercise, mainly based on muscle strength, and attempt to achieve the integration of different dimensions just by adding educational and social aspects. Our approach overcomes the biopsychosocial model and reaches to a more integrated approach, also due to the encounter to enactivism and the thought of Francisco Varela. In fact, the initial cognitivist approach gave good results. However, the cognitivist vision, with its abstract models of human function, showed its limitations. The study of the enactivism helped us to overcome some of these limitations by supporting the idea that movement should be considered a form of embodied and embedded knowledge. Indeed, by rejecting mind-body dualism, enactivism emphasized the inextricable coupling that exists between cognitive processes, the body, and the environment. Let us quickly go over some principles of enactivism to see how we apply them in our exercise. The subject who knows is a mind-body unity, embodiment. He is always situated in a context, embedded. Knowledge learning is not a reproduction of an external reality, but it is a creation of words through sensory-motor coupling, enacted. Each word is related to other words, extended, through tools like memory, imagination, dialogue, assumption, doubt, play, etc. Let's try to see how you can find this aspect in an exercise. In this exercise, the therapist asks the patient to recognize different relationships between the feet for a specific intention. Therefore, the problem posed to the patient through the questions requires him to be attentive to the body. The patient needs to create a mind-body unity, embodied, for a specific neurocognitive task which involves the construction of proprioceptive information, position of 2 feet together. Patient is situated in a context, the exercise situation, and more specifically, the contact of the feet on the surface of the tool, embedded. Patient enacts a world made of tactile and pressure information, enacted. Through the therapist's questions, the patient extends his world to the past. Try to remember when you looked at a landscape in mountain, extended, but also to a future possibility. With your feet in this position, you would be ready to take a step or to look at a landscape. In this exercise, there are comparisons between past, present, and future, between perceived, expected, and remembered actions. And this is what we call comparison between actions. In general, the encounter with enactivism has allowed us to better define the object of recovery, that is, the movement as a kind of knowledge. Hence, the definition of action as intentional process activated by the human system acting in a certain context for its purposes. Our definition of movement is inspired by the aphorism of Maturana and Varela: every action is knowledge and every knowledge is action. Therefore, we believe that every action is an act of knowledge. We assume that body is a receptor surface. Body is not a machine moved by an agent situated in the brain, but it is a receptor surface that allows knowledge needed in that context for a specific intention. So we moved from the abstract, standardized movement studied by anatomy and physiology to individual action. An individual action, is experienced. It is a lived experience for the subject from both a cognitive and emotional point of view. It is contextualized, inserted in a physical and psychic space-time. Historized, it is a part of the story of the subject, concrete, reportable to the senses and real life. In the study of action, interest cannot be directed only to a body observed from the outside. The acting subject enters the game, and therefore interest in his subjective point of view arises. Using these images taken from the book Alice Through the Looking Glass, we want to depict the idea of seeing the world with other eyes, from another point of view, that is, the point of view of the patient. So, since the 2000s, we have been interested in first-person methodologies, again finding point of contact and inspiration in Varela writings. Against the reductionism and quantifying rehabilitative approach, we assumed that first-person descriptions were essential data to understand how the patient organized their actions. We started talking to our patient to ask them what they felt in their body during their actions and during the exercise. So we moved even further from the point of view of the external observer, third person, objective body, medical body, corper, to the interest in the lived body, life, subject of experience. In this process, we realized that the therapist can help the patient to become aware of their lived experience and to express it by words. Listen to the sentences of a patient who suffered trauma with a fractured tibia and subsequent chronic complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS, when asked, "How does you feel your leg?" "How do I feel it?" I couldn't say. Anyway, when I started working again, this leg worsened. What do you think? I have to go to the orthopedist again, or maybe wait as my doctor told me? In my opinion, anyway, maybe it was early to get back to work, and then I'm also depressed. The patient describes himself does not always describe the experience from the perspective of the bodily self. Sometimes he creates a narrative that takes him away from the body by endlessly repeating the same words in the exact same way, distancing himself from perception, from the lived body. So we think that guidance is needed. We could understand the work of the therapist as a guide, a mediation, as a path to guide the patient from the language of the disembodied and empty story to the language of lived experience. In this slide, I summarize the moments of this investigation path, trying to help the patients to express their experience. The patient experiences the disease and their body in action. The therapist asks to describe it, so we have a described experience. And to help them in this process, he must guide them to a self-reflection, a movement of attention directed to experience, help to feel. And therapists also help them to express, for instance, encouraging them to use example, metaphors, and so on. Lastly, as therapists, we interpret descriptions in the light of our purposes. That is, we try to understand through these descriptions how motor organization is altered. Interpretation of language must be available for intersubjective control. So we compare our interpretation with the interpretation of other colleagues. We share our interpretations with the patients who can confirm or disconfirm it, but we also verify our interpretative hypothesis through the exercise that is built on the basis of them. It is necessary to compare what the patient communicates to us through language with what is observed directly or by means of tool. An integrated perspective should be adopted where neither lived experience nor external mechanisms have the final say. And this is also from Varela shared thinking. The interest in the lived experience of the patient led us closer to themes such as ownership and agency, bodily self, and intentionality that constitute links to phenomenological studies. How do we see these issues in the patient? And how do we practice in exercise? I'll give you some examples. The bodily self, missing parts, altered sensation. We find often this kind of description in the patient that we refer to the bodily self. The hand is there until the back. Then there is nothing. I cannot imagine the toes of my foot. They are not there. Or altered size. My left leg is shorter. Altered volume. My left arm is smaller and gaunt. Altered consistency. My leg is like an empty sack. Altered weight. It's like a cement bag. And also we find alteration of body cohesion. The patient loses the sense of unity of the body. I feel so many things, but I don't know what to do with them. So many elements, all talking at once, but not understood. There are A, B, C, so many pieces, but I don't know how to put them together. When I think about fingers, I miss everything else. The body is also experienced from a more emotional point of view. It bothers me. I can't stand it. I can't even touch this leg to put lotion on anymore. It gives me a strange feeling. The narrative we construct with the patient by the exercise is the narrative of the bodily self in action. It is not so much the narrative of the experience of the illness as a whole, and the aspects that emerge are cognitive emotional aspects of the action itself. The therapist questions during the embodied, embedded, and extended experience of the exercise bring out the relational image, a particular kind of autobiographical self. And an example of this, in this exercise, the therapist asks, you are feeling something in your arm in this exercise. What does your feeling remind you? The patient replies, one day in the store when I rearranged the shoes store, I felt just the feeling of the shoes boxes in my hands, and all my memory were suddenly unlocked. And I feel as everything is suddenly unlocked. I haven't cried with emotion. Before, it was as if in my life was empty, meaningless. I would look back and see darkness. I was always asking the same questions because I could not remember so many things that had been said to me a moment before. Now, my memory is completely unblocked. I remember everything. The memories of the past made everything make sense now. Imaging made me find myself again. And he can remember this through the exercise with the physical experience, not only by words. This is very important. In this exercise, the patient has to recognize some forms. You can see a triangle, a square, and a circle. And it is guided by the therapist that guide his index on the figures, on the shape. And so through this exercise and the question of the therapist, patient can remember this fact of his past. What did happen in the therapeutic path through the exercise? There is a present experience, the exercise, experienced in the first person, the present I am. The therapist, through their questions, induce comparison with a prelational experience. The patient draws in this past, I was, and find another possible self, which becomes available for the future, I will be. Temporality, therefore, is a theme that arises from the exercise. One more example that, in my opinion, relates to the aspect of intentional body relations. In this picture, you see the patient touching with her healthy right hand the pelagic hand that is closed and strongly hypertonic. How do you feel your left hand now? This is the question of the therapist. It's heavy, it's nuisance. It is an inert body, anything but the hand, a foreign body, not mine. It is not pleasant. I make an effort to move it. I try to open it, but I can't. This expression, I try to open it, could indicate a generic effort without relational meaning. In assessment phase, the therapist tries to suggest an intentional relationship, a meaning. Now, I'm going to bring your left hand towards your right hand. Try to think of an intention. Your left hand to your right hand too. Don't tell me your intention. Put it in your hand. Does you feel your hand in the same way as before? It's lighter now. With what intention did you touch the other hand? To feel it closer to me. Now, when the left is on the right, I feel a pleasure. It comes instinctively to me. And the patient, as you can see in the picture, maintains her hand open and she touches the other hand. These are just brief examples of a months-long work with patients. So it is really difficult to explain it in a short online meeting. It's a very long work with the patient. Sometimes years. Of course, if any of you are interested, you can make contact with the Study Center and come and see our work to understand it better. The topic of this talk is the bridges between phenomenology, particularly between enactivism and neurocognitive rehabilitation. In this slide, I recap the three principles of neurocognitive rehabilitation: movement as a means of knowledge, body as a receptor surface, and recovery as a learning process in pathological conditions. How these principles are linked to phenomenology and enactivism? I try to hypothesize some links. The first principle is movement as a means of knowledge, and we have seen how the principle contains the themes of intentional relationship, the mind-body context unity, and the knowledge as a creation of words. Okay. The second principle is the body, as a receptor surface, and it is related to the idea of a bodily self as an experiential self, always immersed in a world, not a machine. The third principle is rehabilitation as learning. This leads to the idea of the construction of connections between past relational experience, present and future, planned experience. It carries with it the themes of temporality and the autobiographical self. In this photo is the last one in the slide. In these photos, you can see a smiling team, that is our team in the Center of Rehabilitation. And with me now here, I have the scientific director of the center, Marina Zernitz, that will participate to the debate after the talk. And I would like to close this talk with a little video that I will show after this slide, and with a sentence from Professor Perfetti, who used to say, "How can you measure a smile? I will thank you to have been attentive." And I will present a little video from a patient. This patient was affected by chronic regional pain syndrome, and she felt the pain in the right feet, localized specifically in the heel. Therapists, you will see that therapists teach the meaning of the heel for the knowledge, beginning from the left unaffected feet, that will be a model for the affected one. So it's just an example of an exercise. Ok, adesso devo uscire. Come faccio? C'è un attimo.